The UFC once built legends like Conor McGregor from the ground up. But when it comes to Tom Aspinall, the interim heavyweight champ who destroys contenders in minutes, the hype is missing. Why is the UFC sitting on a fighter who could dominate the division for years and instead clinging to fading stars? By the end of this video, you'll wonder if the UFC is setting Aspinall up for failure. What happens when a fighter has the full weight of the UFC's promotional machine behind them? You get something like Conor McGregor's meteoric rise, a combination of skill, strategy, and relentless promotion that turned him into a global icon. But here's the real question. Was McGregor's stardom inevitable because of his abilities, or was it orchestrated from day one by the UFC? McGregor's UFC debut in April 2013 was electric. A first-round TKO finish over Marcus Brimage that immediately drew attention. He wasn't just winning, he was winning in style. But what truly set him apart wasn't just his slick striking or knockout power, it was his ability to sell himself, and the UFC wasted no time capitalizing on it. After just one fight, McGregor stood out as a charismatic, brash-talking figure who could command a camera as easily as he dominated inside the Octagon. The UFC leaned into this, promoting him as something larger than the other fighters on the roster, even at a time when he hadn't achieved much in terms of accolades. What's critical to understand is that McGregor's rise wasn't a lucky streak of wins. It was carefully mapped out by the UFC. His trash-talking persona, with his confidence bordering on arrogance, made him an instant magnet for attention. The company fed into this. They paired him with fighters who were skilled enough to make him look good, but not necessarily threatening enough to derail his climb. By his fourth fight, the UFC had him headlining events, a privilege usually reserved for veterans or champions. The message was loud and clear. Conor McGregor wasn't just another fighter, he was the fighter fans were supposed to care about. And the audience bought it. By the time McGregor fought Dustin Poirier in September 2014, his profile had skyrocketed. His famous pre-fight press conferences were now events in themselves, filled with cutting one-liners and relentless confidence. Statements like, "We're not here to take part, we're here to take over," became instant soundbites plastered across social media. It didn't matter if you loved him or hated him, you watched him. The UFC knew that polarizing figures sell tickets, and McGregor was the perfect storm of charisma and talent to drive interest. The UFC didn't just let his personality do the work either. Behind the scenes, the promotion ensured McGregor stayed at the forefront of fight fans' minds. His bouts were marketed heavily, with trailers, interviews, and features across UFC's platforms, and that exposure worked. By the time McGregor faced Jose Aldo for the featherweight title in December 2015, he was a household name, not just in Ireland but across the globe. This fight, built up with months of trash talk and face-offs, culminated in a 13-second knockout that became one of the most played highlights in MMA history. The numbers, too, were staggering. Over 1.2 million pay-per-view buys for that event alone. McGregor wasn't just a fighter anymore, he was the centerpiece of the UFC's business model. The UFC then took things even further by fast-tracking McGregor into uncharted territory. Instead of defending his featherweight title against contenders in line, the promotion immediately booked him into a lightweight title fight. The goal was clear. Make him the first fighter in UFC history to hold championships in two divisions at the same time. That fight, against Eddie Alvarez in November 2016, not only made history, but also cemented McGregor as the face of the sport. With over 1.3 million pay-per-view buys on that card, McGregor's status as the UFC's golden ticket was undeniable. But perhaps more interesting than McGregor's ability to attract viewers was how dependent his rise was on the UFC's direct involvement. From custom promos to prime fight slots, McGregor was treated as MMA royalty. The company invested in him like no other athlete, ensuring he was everywhere. ESPN interviews, late-night TV appearances, you name it. They amplified his antics, turning press conferences and weigh-in scuffles into spectacles that dominated headlines for weeks leading up to his fights. In the end, McGregor's rapid ascent showed what happens when the UFC decides to turn a fighter into its centerpiece. His stardom wasn't just built on victories. It was a polished product, packaged and sold at every turn. And the investment paid off. McGregor became not just the most recognizable name in MMA, but one of the highest-paid athletes in the world. In 2021, for instance, Forbes listed him as the highest-paid athlete globally, with earnings exceeding $180 million, much of which stemmed from his fighting career and branding tied to it. Here's where things get interesting, though. The same formula that catapulted McGregor into superstardom isn't being replicated for other fighters, even those with the skills to dominate for years to come. Tom Aspinall, for example, has shown himself to be one of the most exciting athletes in the heavyweight division, with one of the fastest win streaks and a stylistic edge that makes him stand out. Yet the UFC isn't shouting his name from the rooftops. Why isn't Aspinall getting the McGregor treatment? Are his accomplishments being overshadowed, or is there something deeper at play here? Tom Aspinall's record speaks for itself. His ability to dominate heavyweight contenders in record-breaking fashion is undeniable. In a division often known for slower-paced fights, Aspinall has brought speed, technique, and explosive finishes that set him apart. With the lowest average fight time in the UFC, he has consistently proven that it doesn't take him long to get the job done. His first-round destruction of Sergey Pavlovich to claim the interim heavyweight title confirmed what many had already suspected. Aspinall is no ordinary contender. Yet, despite all of this, the UFC has stayed strangely quiet when it comes to promoting him as the future of the heavyweight division. This lack of major promotional effort feels jarring when you consider his resume. Aspinall hasn't just won fights. He has dismantled opponents in a way that excites fans. His performances are fast, dynamic, and precise, making him must-see TV every time he steps into the octagon. But even with an interim title around his waist, the UFC doesn't seem to be fully committing to pushing his star power. After his pivotal win over Pavlovich, a moment where most champions would enter the spotlight, the UFC simply moved on with its plans for Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic, a fight that fans have largely viewed as unnecessary. Both Jones and Miocic are nearing the ends of their careers, adding little to the long-term future of the division. Meanwhile, Aspinall has been stranded, sidelined while the UFC prioritizes two legends who might not even be fighting a year from now. The frustrating part isn't just the delay, it's the mixed messaging from the promotion. In theory, winning an interim title should catapult a fighter into the conversation as the next undisputed champion. Instead, Aspinall was left with no direction, forced to defend his interim belt against Curtis Blades just to stay active. Interim champions rarely defend their titles. It's supposed to be a short-term solution until the undisputed champion can return. Yet Aspinall found himself fighting to keep momentum while waiting for clarity in a division that feels stagnant at the top. Jon Jones's role in all of this only adds to the tension. Aspinall made it clear he's ready to fight Jones, but Jones has avoided the idea at every turn. Whether it's dodging questions about Aspinall during interviews or expressing more interest in facing fighters like Alex Pereira, Jones hasn't shown any willingness to step into the octagon with him. Fans have noticed, analysts have noticed, and it's hard to ignore how this reluctance affects Aspinall's path. For a fighter in his prime, fully capable of carrying the heavyweight division into a new era, these delays and excuses come across as barriers that shouldn't even exist. Then there's the question of Jon Jones's own future. By most accounts, Jones has hinted that his fight with Miocic could be his last. If that's the case, why isn't the UFC positioning Aspinall as the natural successor? Jones's refusal to acknowledge him and the promotion's lack of urgency to set up a fight between the two only deepens the frustration. The situation becomes even more confusing when you recognize the logic. Building Aspinall as the next dominant heavyweight champion makes much more sense than focusing on a parting fighter. It feels as though the UFC is clinging to the name value of established stars while ignoring the incredible opportunity in front of them. Fans and analysts have grown vocal about this inconsistency. If someone like Aspinall isn't receiving the attention and effort he deserves, what message does that send about the UFC's priorities? Fighters in their primes, with the tools and talent to define an era, should be the focus. Yet the UFC has left Aspinall in limbo, holding an interim title that seems to have as much weight as a placeholder trophy. Even his win over Pavlovich, a dangerous and respected opponent, hasn't moved the needle when it comes to the kind of groundbreaking opportunities the UFC typically reserves for its rising stars. What's most concerning is the long-term damage this could do to Aspinall's career. Momentum is everything in mixed martial arts, and Aspinall is riding a wave that could catapult him into true superstardom. But with every stalled fight or ignored challenge, the risk grows that he'll lose that momentum. Fans have short memories, and the longer Aspinall is left defending an interim title instead of fighting for undisputed greatness, the harder it becomes for his star power to grow. By sidelining him in favor of aging legends and a fight schedule stuck in neutral, the UFC risks wasting one of the best opportunities it has to rejuvenate the heavyweight division. Aspinall has all the tools to become a household name in combat sports. He's marketable, dangerously skilled, and ready for the kind of high-profile moments that define careers. The question now isn't whether he's capable of carrying the division, it's whether the UFC will give him the support he needs to get there. If they don't, they may face a problem that's entirely of their own making. A neglected champion who deserved so much more. And if Tom Aspinall can't get the push he deserves, what does that say about how the UFC treats its champions across the board? Why do some UFC champions rocket to the top while others seem to tread water indefinitely? The inconsistency in how the UFC handles its champions and title situations has been hard to ignore, and it's a problem that extends far beyond Tom Aspinall. Fighters like Islam Makhachev and Ilia Topuria have found themselves forced to vacate titles when moving up in weight class, yet Jon Jones remains untouched, sitting on the heavyweight belt despite inactivity and no clear timeline for a return. These double standards not only frustrate fans and fighters but also damage the legitimacy of entire divisions, and interim titles like Aspinall's often end up looking like little more than an afterthought. Take Islam Makhachev, for example. As one of the most dominant lightweight champions in recent memory, Makhachev's move to campaign across weight classes seemed like an exciting prospect for both fans and the UFC. However, once discussions started about him going up to welterweight, the UFC immediately required him to vacate his lightweight title. Makhachev was left choosing between career growth and staying tied to his more established division. The situation created waves because it appeared the UFC prioritized event scheduling, namely securing a main event slot for International Fight Week, over allowing Makhachev to hold on to his legacy in multiple divisions. Ilia Topuria faced similar treatment. When Topuria sought to move up from featherweight to lightweight, the UFC wasted no time vacating his belt as well, facilitating a matchup at UFC 314 that suited their timeline. These decisions showed a pattern of inconsistency. What's allowed for one fighter is swiftly denied to another, depending not on their accomplishments but on the UFC's immediate needs. And then there's the case of Jon Jones. Despite being inactive since March 2023, Jones still holds the undisputed heavyweight title, even with Tom Aspinall claiming the interim belt after defeating Sergey Pavlovich in dominant fashion. Typically, the interim title signals urgency, a placeholder for a returning champion to unify the belts. Yet in this instance, the UFC doubled down on their plans to book Jones and Stipe Miocic, a match few were eager to see, rather than addressing the rising star waiting in the wings. Unlike Makhachev and Topuria, Jones faces no pressure to vacate his title, even though his future plans remain murky at best. The result? Aspinall's shot at undisputed champion status gets delayed indefinitely, sidelining a fighter at his peak and unnecessarily stalling the division. This discrepancy between fighters exposes a deeper issue. By emphasizing particular fights or fighters over clear policies, the UFC undermines the purpose of interim titles, which are supposed to signify a future champion in waiting. For Aspinall, holding the interim belt feels more like treading water than stepping into the next phase of his career. Fans and analysts alike have pointed out that it effectively positions Aspinall as a mere placeholder, while the promotion scrambles to squeeze one last payday out of Jones and Miocic, two veterans at the tail ends of their careers. Is the UFC putting short-term profits ahead of building future stars? The case of Tom Aspinall raises some uncomfortable questions. Aspinall stands out as a heavyweight with elite skills, a style that excites fans, and a record impressive enough to stake his claim as a generational talent. But instead of elevating him, the UFC seems intent on delaying his ascent. While Aspinall waits, the promotion focuses its energy on Jon Jones, an older champion closer to retirement than long-term dominance. The financial motives behind these decisions are clear, but they might come at the expense of the UFC's future. The UFC's inconsistent priorities aren't new, but the consequences could be monumental. Favoring familiar names like Jon Jones, while sidelining emerging stars like Tom Aspinall, suggests a system built for short-term gains rather than long-term stability. As one source put it, the UFC is killing one of their biggest future stars by letting Aspinall's prime years slip by without meaningful promotion. Fans hold power, demand better treatment for talents like Aspinall, fighters who are ready to carry divisions and grow the sport. The question remains, is the UFC shaping legends or letting them fade before they ever shine? The future depends on it.